Hey y'all, it's your girl Brittany. I always do the stupidest things. I'm starting this. Also, it is 3:45 a.m. Please ignore that seat back there. That is my messy bedside table. I have to clean it. Also ignore the cat meowing. But today's video is going to be a fun one. Okay? So I have downloaded the Reddit app. I've seen a lot of people go on the Reddit no sleep thing. I don't know how Reddit works, so please forgive me. And they have been reading stories off of it. Well, I found one. I haven't started reading it yet. I want to read it on camera. There's 11 parts to it, so I don't know how many videos I'm going to make. It depends on how long each part is, but I'm filming them all tonight and editing them all tonight and scheduling them, not all tonight, but I'm uploading them all tonight and scheduling them to upload for the next however many days. Also, I am so mad. So, I have these light stands, and I don't want to move it because I'm scared I'm going to break it, and if I break it, then I'm screwed. I have no lights. Oh, here you go. Here's the one I broke. So, this light stand right here was over here, so that way I had two lights on me, so it was like even lighting. Yeah. I tripped over the board on it. It fell and like shattered. And I have no idea what happened to my third light, so I'm screwed. And I'm a bit mad. So, this was a long, babbly intro. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe on this video and this channel. I think we're ready to start the video now. Let's go! What the name of it is, my friend has been living in an alternate reality for the past 7 years. This is what he told me. This is the very first part. In order for me to tell you about this, you're going to need to know a bit about Clint first. Now, I've known him for around 8 years. He was always strange to say the least, but not in the sense that it made him an outcast. The opposite, actually. I guess strange wasn't the right word. Let's call him exceptional. If I were to give you a quick rundown of his life, it looks something like this. Straight A's from primary to post-secondary, full rides to Ivy League, the internship offers out the ass after just his undergraduate year. Astonishingly charismatic? Comment below how that's pronounced. I don't know. And handsome. It was to the point where nobody seemed to be bitter towards him, not jealous either. They just admired him. But despite all the parties he was invited to, all the attempts at friendship, all the girls that threw themselves at him, he chose to be a loner. In fact, I was one of the only people he talked to. Couldn't tell you why he chose me as an acquaintance, he just did. And let me tell you, I was about as average gets, set for a life of mundanity. It all started in 7th grade. I just failed the geometry test. To be fair, I didn't really study for it, but whatever. Clint was sitting right by me. I saw him take one disaffected glance at his paper before putting it down. He got 100, of course. I guess he saw me staring because he looked down at my paper and chuckled. It was slightly embarrassing, of course, but instead of hurling an insult, he asked me if I had wanted to come over after school and study. Maybe play some video games. I agreed. That's when I started to get a glimpse into his ideas. You see, he was never satisfied with anything. Remember our conversations I remember our conversations regarding what we wanted to do in the future. I had the generic answers: buy a Lamborghini, a big house in Hollywood, marry Megan Fox. Yeah, I was that asshole. But Clint, he wanted something different. He had bigger aspirations. Adventure, he told me. Going somewhere uncharted. Discovering something new, you know? Something that nobody's seen. At that time, I didn't know what he meant. What, like Jupiter or some shit? I asked him. He just chuckled. Maybe, something like that. At that time, I couldn't fathom why he would want to go into space. Nothing's up there, I told him. What's the point? He just gave me an amused look. But it wasn't one of those contentious superiority. Oh my god, I suck. And my last name is Reedy. I wasn't like that. He knew that I couldn't have understood, but he didn't fault me for it. Well, think about it. People's lives have become lackluster, he went on. When we have all the comforts in the world, everything turns into structure, routine, nothing's new. Our destiny decided by the time we're out of college. Who the hell wants to get caught up in all the rat race and just chase monotony day to day? That's the worst possible outcome. That's why we watch movies and read books. Escapism. Looking for stories that are infinitely more satisfying than the one we're living in. I mean, what do we really have to look forward to? He talked a lot like this, but it didn't sound suicidal. It was something else. This guy beyond was driven, I could see it. But to be honest, I couldn't tell you what he did in the long hours he spent in his room alone. He never talked about it. By the time we went off to Caltech, and I went to Penn State, we started drifting apart. In fact, after the first year of his master's degree, he stopped talking to me completely. Stopped talking to anybody, actually. When he didn't go home for spring break, his folks called the cops. Apparently, he stopped going to class as well. They looked for him, but there were no traces. It was a cold case, going nowhere. However, I do remember the last time we had communicated, he sent me a Facebook message. This is all it said. Do you want to be a part of something? It's a project I'm working on. I can explain more later. I'd sent him a message back asking about specifics, but he never responded. That was the last I'd heard of him for about 7 years. That was before he knocked on my door in the middle of the night some hours ago. I wasn't going to open at first. These kinds of stories never end well. However, that's when I heard my name being called by a distantly familiar voice. I couldn't believe my ears. I stared through the people at what looked a homeless man. He had dirty, tattered clothes, a mass of a beard, and a generally unkempt appearance. But I recognized those eyes instantly. I recognized that spark. It was Clint. I opened up and greeted him in disbelief. But before I could pelt him with questions, he stopped me. Look, don't freak out. I'll explain everything. Maybe let me shower first, though. He flashed his award-winning smile at me though his pearly white eyes weren't what they used to be. It's really good to see you, by the way. That's when I got a closer look at his frame. He was bigger than I remembered, bulkier. Looked like he put on 10 pounds of muscle. His model-like face was now weather-beaten and covered in scars. He also smelled of sweat and grime. This was absolutely insane to say the least. After he washed up and settled into a couch, he laid it all out. I'm going to tell you what he told me verbatim. Apparently, during the latter half of his undergraduate year, he was approached by his physics professor, Joel Russ, a somewhat eccentric 42-year-old, but he was supposedly brilliant. Russ had chosen Clint specifically to partake in what he called a research project. He laughed when he told me this. We had to call it that, he said. If they knew what we were really doing, the funding would have been gone. There were 14 other people involved in this. 2 theoretical physicists. I think that's it. 3 cosmologists, 2 young thrill seekers, 2 ex-Navy SEALs, and a discharged U.S. soldier, an archaeologist, a retired MMA fighter, a disgraced entrepreneur, and a suicidal drifter Russ found trying to jump off a bridge. It was a strange group for sure. But we all shared similar ideals, he explained. For one reason or another, we were all looking to get away from the world, from this world, looking for another frontier. Apparently, while on vacation, Russ had discovered something peculiar off a remote coast on the South Islands in New Zealand, something over the Cook Strait. Russ explained that he'd been seeing some kind of strange, thick fog that hung under the clouds. We didn't know what he meant by that, Clint stated. He never really explained it. For years, he'd spent his summers over there and observed it himself. He'd spend every second of his free time analyzing his observations. Eventually, he enlisted the help of some cosmologists and other physicists. Clint looked at me. It seemed as if he was having trouble holding in a huge grin. You know what that theory they came to was? I shook my head. It was a passage to somewhere else, a different universe, so to speak. This floored me. I was skeptical for about a second, but then I thought about who I was talking to, and how strange this whole situation was. I just kept listening. I asked him how they figured that out. You want details? He replied. I thought about, no, not really. Science was never my strong point, anyhow. He told me that Russ had started conducting experiments. He'd fly a drone into the fog whenever a storm was brewing. Those were the only times where it was visible. He'd estimated that after it disappeared, there would be about a 3-minute window where he could control it. After that, it was gone forever. That's why we needed the funding, Clint explained. This shit was expensive. The accumulation of all these experiments and all this research was supposed to be a trip into the fog, just to see what they would find. That's when Russ started forming the team. It took a while, but he eventually gathered together people he deemed would be fit for something like this, along with other researchers involved. He said that he chose me because of an essay I wrote for class. The topic was about what the universe meant to us as individuals, Clint said. I guess it spoke to him. I'm sure he had other reasons as well. He smirked to himself. Now, while the ex-military and thrill seekers were all in good shape, Russ and the researchers weren't. Nobody knew what to expect, really. That's why we had to train cardio, strength, agility, the works. Nobody wanted to lag behind, Clint elaborated. After about 3 years, they deemed themselves ready to go. The big day was finally there. On a warm spring day in California and a particularly choppy one on the South Islands, Russ, Clint, and the rest of the team piled into a private plane owned by the entrepreneur. They brought with them months' worth of rations, weapons, first aid kits, and research equipment. Parachutes as well, just in case, everything you could think of. Funnily enough, the drifter was the only person who knew how to pilot. I remember thinking that this was batshit. Wait, I asked him, so you guys were just going through this? Was nobody scared of what could happen? He just chuckled. So we have a bunch of insane researchers, soldiers scarred by combat, thrill seekers, a suicidal guy. Don't even get me started on myself, and you think we gave a shit? No, I guess we weren't. As it turns out, they'd They figured out what Russ was talking about when they got close to the thing. Apparently the fog was dark gray, almost black. It was maybe 100 meters below the clouds, and it was massive. The strangest part was that it didn't move at all, and you could clearly tell where it began and where it ended. Everybody braced themselves upon entering. They were suddenly submerged into darkness. Clint said that he could see the silhouette of anticipation on everybody's faces from the faint cabin lights. After 3 minutes, the plane starts malfunctioning. Here's the fucked up part. Russ never actually told anyone about the drone experiments until afterwards. So when this happened, everybody started freaking out. Nobody was expecting it. But soon after, a wave of light filled the plane. What they saw out the windows was incomprehensible. A dark, foreboding landscape. Heavy rain pounded the windows, while a cacophony of violent lightning bolts struck around them. To make matters worse, the plane was headed down into a black ocean beneath. As they got closer, they could tell there was definitely movement in the water. Large movements. And they weren't just waves. Luckily for them, the plane was also on a trajectory for a land mass up ahead. Nobody asked questions. They just stuffed their bags with weapons, rations, and water before hastily strapping on their parachutes. It was at this point where they realized military training would have come in handy. Right then, it was every man for themselves. Once the plane was nearly over the island, everybody started jumping out. A good portion of the team didn't get so lucky. Other than Russ, only one of the researchers survived. 2 of them couldn't open their parachute in time. One landed in the water where he was quickly consumed by something, and one got struck by lightning on the way down. The entrepreneur and one of the ex-SEALs also didn't make it, both landing rough on the rocky shoreline. The team was suddenly down to 10. They watched as the plane spiraled out of control into the murky sea. The fog was also still visible in the distance, just hanging there. After they regrouped, they just sat in silence for a while. Nobody knew what to think. Russ's theory looked to be right, it seemed. The island itself was pretty similar to tropical ones you would find here on Earth, except for the trees as tall as apartment complexes and the fact that the sky was always cloudy. They'd later find out that this place had a name, Dusk Blue. Another peculiar thing was the lightning never seemed to strike land, only the ocean. Good news for them, they started making their way into the jungle in front of them. With nowhere else to go, this is all they could do amongst them. This is all they could do. Amongst them, they managed to take 6 pistols, 4 machetes, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. No reserve ammunition though. They had also concluded that they have about 5 days of food and water for all of them. Sorry, gotta yawn. As they made their way across the land, some creepy, unexplainable shit started happening. The MMA fighter, they called him Duke, went to go piss under or in some bushes at one point. About 30 seconds later, he ran back to the group, freaked out and hyperventilating. Everybody tried asking him what happened. That's when they looked at the clearing he had come from. Duke was standing right there with a blank expression plastered on his face, but he was also with them. Then, out of nowhere, his copy began sprinting backwards into the woods at a torrid pace. Another occurrence took place when they came across what looked like a void just floating in the air in front of them. It was literally a door-sized black shape that was devoid of anything. One of the thrill seekers, Jeff, stuck his hand into it for a few seconds before pulling it back. He could still move it, but it had become completely numb. It stayed that way. Apparently, one night they woke up to the sound of shells blasting in the air. Lauren, the archaeologist, was shooting at something just a few meters away from where they were sleeping. Clint said it was hard to describe. Something along the lines of a massive spider-human hybrid. The shotgun didn't affect it. It just crawled away. God, this sounds like a fucking nightmare. What is it that you wanted? Or is that what you wanted? I asked him. I was sincerely curious. I mean, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. His words sounded genuine. I guess it didn't matter that I couldn't understand him. He understood himself. He went on. 3 days passed and they're still in the jungle. They didn't know where they were heading, but nobody wanted to admit that. Russ and the cosmologist continuously record their observations while everybody else is getting antsy. They were running out of food. The other thrill seeker, Clint, forgot his name. Was starting to go delirious. They'd seen a small creature that vaguely remembered a chicken, and he tried attacking it with a machete. Unfortunately, his throat was instantly slit upon making contact with it. Nobody went near any wildlife after that. It looked like hunting for food was now out of the question. Urgency was setting in. At night, they'd start hearing horrific, unrecognizable sounds all around them. One time, they woke up to see a pale humanoid creature with no facial features sitting cross-legged just a few meters away. Suddenly, the skin on its head peeled back to reveal a singular, monstrous-sized eye. It only needed to blink one more time before everybody got the hell out of there. They had also come across a strange hole in the ground at one point. It was about the size of a basketball. The other ex-SEAL, name also forgotten, walked up to take a look. Cautiously, he peered into it. About a minute passes, and he still hadn't moved. People started shouting at him to just leave it, but he'd ignore everything. They tried prying him away, but he didn't budge. He just stayed crouched, eyes blankly transfixed on the hole. After about 10 minutes, they left him. Things were reaching a tipping point once the 5th day came. They were starving, sleep-deprived, and paranoid. With only 4 MREs left for the 8 of them, they needed to conserve energy. However, every time they stopped to rest, they'd hear footsteps behind them. They'd look for the source, but there was nothing visible to be found. The steps would just get louder and louder. Eventually, they caught up. Clint said that they could hear something running quick circles around them before he started to feel lightheaded. The last thing he remembered hearing before passing out was a barrage of shouts coming from somewhere in front of them. Oh my god, I have the hiccups. And oh my god. None of them voices that he'd recognized. He awoke sometime later, laying on a stiff mattress in a small wood cabin. His head was pounding, his face was covered in dry blood when he touched it. He looked around the room, nearly jumping out of his skin when he saw somebody sharpening some kind of weapon on the corner. But he didn't look to be human, resembling a Mediterranean man. Upon seeing Clint awake, he got up and introduced himself as Slade. He also spoke English, albeit it was a strange accent that Clint said he'd never heard before. Now, Clint was no small guy at 6'1", but Slade still towered over him. He'd explained that he was essentially a guard protecting a walled civilization called Bureau Locus, where Clint currently lives. He described how he and the rest of the team had come into contact with what the locals referred to as stalkers. They eventually managed to fend them off, bringing Clint and the rest to safety. They were happy to let them stay as long as they did their fair share of work. He further explained the island that they were on. As it turns out, Dusk Blue was actually one of the few places in the world that had a semblance of order in society. While most of it was still extremely hostile, there were protected settlements set up all around where people could live in relative peace. However, the main attraction was at the center, a massive self-governing city-state known as Paradise X. While settlements like Pharaoh Locust could be compared to small towns in the Old West, Paradise X was more comparable to a modern-day metropolis. He went on to explain a strange trend in births on the island in which around 1 in 1,000 children were born with enhanced levels of strength, speed, and nearly impenetrable skin. Officials from Paradise X would come around to settlements every now and then in order to recruit these children into the security force set to protect their borders. In exchange, the families would be allowed citizenship and a place to live within the city. Of course, everybody was after this. This resulted in a lot of questionable moral decisions when it came to children. Clint then asked about all the stuff that had happened before they were rescued. All the weird shit. Apparently, Slade just sighed and told him not to worry about it. He didn't have answers either. That stuff's always been there, and it was better not to think about it. He told him to simply stay inside the settlement and not to cause any trouble. The punishment for disorderly conduct was exile. I was still trying to wrap my head around any of this when Clint started yawning. He told me that he was tired and that we could talk in the morning. I tried to get him to stay up and tell me more, but his eyes were already halfway closed. I've gone through some messed up shit, man. Just let me rest a bit. Don't worry, I got more to tell you. Spent 7 years over there for Christ's sake, he said drowsily. Yeah, fine, you can take the guest room, I told him after feeding him some leftover spaghetti. I let him up there. I had to ask him one more thing before he passed out though. What about your folks? How the hell are you going to explain this to them? He paused for a second before speaking. Couldn't if I tried. They're gone, man. To be honest, the lack of emotion in his voice disturbed me a bit. Oh shit, I'm sorry, was all I could utter out. But he just let out a forced chuckle and said, "What are you sorry for? You didn't do anything," before disappearing into the bedroom. That's when I really thought about what had just happened. If Clint's been telling me the truth, then that's horrifying to think about. I guess I'll write another update when he wakes up. I'm intrigued. Oh my gosh. Like, when I read this stuff, like, my mind wanders and I'm just like, what if that's true? That would be insane. But that was part 1. I'll have a question for every single video. Question for part 1 is, what do you think happened to Clint's parents? I think something happened in that alternate reality. Maybe there was a glitch, or maybe Clint or somebody did something and his parents had to suffer. Because if you remember, the guy said that disorderly conduct leads to exile. Like, what if? I will see you guys tomorrow. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And I love you guys so much.